I don't know what time it is, but I'm going to start anyways, and we'll just usurp people as they come in. One of the things I'd like you all to do is get out a piece of paper or an electronic device that you'd like to record some stuff. And I'd like you to write a couple questions that you have. If you are a new user, I'd like you to write questions that you have about trying to use IBL in your classroom. And if you're an experienced user, I'd like you to write questions that perhaps a new user might ask.
Where's the B+? They should have had an A. And just, I think this
Okay, so you all have discussed very good questions here. I've been eavesdropping. And my question to you all is, within just the 2 or 3 of you, do you have any conjectures, mathematical term, about how you can overcome some of these first year or new user IBL questions? So the prompt was to have questions about first year or new user IBL. And now my question is, do we have conjectures or perhaps thoughts about solutions towards that?
I do.
Okay, okay, okay. So let's go ahead and share them within the 2 or 3 of you, and then we're going to get into a larger group discussion in just a bit. These questions about assessment.
Right.
What do you have a conjecture about? How could you handle assessment, right? Questions we've had. So I would prompt you all to, first of all, ask a couple of questions.
I mean, I like being. I got better.
So I did it.
I would also encourage, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do this. I'd also encourage you all give each other. So we've got about 20 minutes remaining of this discussion, and I'd like to bring it to the larger group or to the whole group. One question I heard commonly around all 3 groups was of assessment. Especially when you're a new user, how do you assess what's going on in the classroom? Does anybody have any conjectures? And if you do, please go to the microphone.
It seems like, based off what other people have said, you kind of know how people are doing, and assessment is more just of an external structure for people to kind of latch onto.
Anybody else? Assessment and, yeah, Ashley.
I heard in a talk yesterday, I cannot remember. Actually, Amanda, were you the one with the slips? Then Amanda should tell you.
No, you tell me.
Well, well, there were slips of paper, and so there were different colors. And like, if you participated or answered a question, you got a slip of paper. You put your name on the back and put it on the table. And if you, extra participated, extra hard question, maybe a gold slip of paper, and that's worth like 2 points. And so you collect the papers at the end of the day, and then you can count up how many points students, and it's a way to do participation points. So I remember that.
So there were 3 types of papers, one for presenting at the board, and those were gold. And people will grab the gold papers, like, okay, who wants a gold slip of paper? They really wanted the gold ones. You can go present at the board for a gold slip of paper. You can assist a presentation for a peach slip of paper, or you can generate to a whole class discussion for a yellow slip of paper. And the gold were worth 2 presentation points, the peach were worth 1 presentation point, and the yellow is worth 1 participation point, and they know how many points they're supposed to be at a given week. They have to get a yellow slip of paper every other day, and gold once a week in general.
So along with that, right, there may be courses that are much, it would be slightly difficult to collect all of those, right? Let's say a class of 150, right? How could we then adjust for participation with a larger class setting? I mean, this is incredibly difficult. If I may borrow a term, it's an open problem in mathematics education, right? But honestly, how can an instructor handle it, let's say even 40 or 50, right, in the classroom? How can one handle participation, or is it too much?
So maybe not with 40 or 50, but with a slightly smaller group, you could have just or like I've done it with maybe 20 or 25, you could just keep a spreadsheet of everybody's name, and when they present, or when they help each other present or critique, you can just make a little mark and say whether what they said was good, was medium, or was bad, and then, just as the spreadsheet sort of fills up, you can, and it's not perfect, but you get some sort of sense of how they were doing, some sort of recording of it. Yeah, I think it'd be tough with more people, though.
I did exactly that with a class of 20. But also, this is kind of different, but maybe a suggestion. Students sit in the same seats anyway, all the time. That's like a rule. So in my liberal arts math class, unrelated to, it wasn't even an IBL class, but I just had a spreadsheet of, it was a seating chart, clustered of 4. They sat in little tables of 4, and so that was that. And I had you can squeeze 3 weeks into one spreadsheet, and just anytime the person speaks up, check a box, put a little check or whatever, and tally them up, and that works.
Yes.
So I haven't tried this, but I was in an IBL class, and I think it was pretty effective. We were in groups of 3 for 3 weeks at a time. So it was a smaller class. There was, I think, 24 of us or something. We were in groups of 3 for 3 weeks at a time, and during those 3 weeks, we had 3 theorems, corollaries, lemmas, whatever, that we had to present to the class. During that time, you had to be a presenter, a question answer, and a reporter. And you didn't have a choice, you had to pick one, and each person had to do one task at least once. And so that way you could extend it to, groups of 5 or 6 and, kind of divvy up the work. And so that could be a way, if you're in a larger class, not having individual people present, but a group of 4 and having one person present one week and then the next person the next week. I don't know, I thought it was pretty effective.
Yeah, I can. So it depends on what kind of resources that you have for classes that are the sizes of about 120 and above. But things that can be used are things like electronic devices like clickers. So then you can implement peer instruction and have participation done through clickers, which is done a lot at UC San Diego, especially in the physics department. Other ways are things, if you have the resources to be able to have, say, learning assistants in your class, so undergrads helping out that are higher level, say in a pre-calc or a calc class, then the class can be split up into sections, like maybe 4 sections of 30 or something of that sort if you have a class of 120, and each learning assistant has their own section that they can walk around and answer questions, and the students are expected to work in at least pairs on a worksheet, and then you can collect the worksheet, and you're not trying to manage the whole class by yourself. But And a lot of times, though, if you're going to have a class of 120, you're going to have these additional resources. So it just kind of depends on how you can utilize them.
I want to interject just a bit. I think that with larger classes, or even with smaller classes, I think breaking into small groups and having students participate then is it's a low ceiling for them if they're nervous in front of a large group and so forth, right? I mean, you all were participating, right? Another point I kind of want to make, and I don't want to be the sage on the stage or anything, but I have done the spreadsheet system, and it was hands down the most complained about part of my teaching evaluations. In fact, some students were convinced that their grades would have been different had I not had the participation or had the participation. So I have actually gone towards not evaluating participation and have still found the same amount of participation, which is kind of ludicrous. But that's to everyone, right? I mean, to each. I think that participation should be valued somewhat, but I don't know how to do it yet. And I've tried for 5 semesters doing it differently each time. So I want to also talk about actually, speaking of participation, there's usually in a classroom a minority that likes to participate at the board quite often, right? Yes. We also had the young woman up who said that she went to the board 17 times when other people went twice, right? So, and this is, so this is a double-edged sword here, right? And hopefully not a sword. That's too negative. Double shining light. But it's one that you have this student really eager and really wanting to participate, and yet you also want to get the others to participate. Do you all have any conjectures or ideas or thoughts about handling those kind of situations? And I think, honestly, disclaimer, and maybe this is blasphemous, but it happens in non-IBL courses as well as IBL courses. But how can we handle that kind of participation in the classroom? Yeah, and then
one of my mentors back when I was teaching high school had a student like that. I had him too a little later, and her suggestion was that he only got to go to the board every 4th problem, and that seemed to work for him, I think.
Okay.
So just a hard limit like that.
It worked for both parties. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I guess mine is similar. These people, their enthusiasm doesn't die. So you can just ignore them and they will stay as enthusiastic. And they understand. You have to remind the class that you're trying to get everyone to participate. It's really hard because they're in the corner, like, really wanting to go. But I found just, like, trying to pick out other people and just ignoring them works. I mean, it's hard, but.
Anyone else? Yeah, Kirsten.
No audio, okay. So the class size that I had the experience about talking about in was about 35. And so what I found is the way the classroom was set up was in rows. And so what I would do is I would say, okay, I want an answer for this problem from row 1. And then I wouldn't go in order. I wouldn't go like 1, 2, 3, 4, because then they'd be like, oh, well, she just did row 3. She's not going to ask my row the next question. I would mix it up. And then as I got to know the students better and make that a big priority, I'd be like, okay, I need an answer from row 1, but not from Alex, so it just depends. But I didn't do that right at first because you don't have the relationship, but I found that the rows worked really well for me, and then once I got to know them, I could be like, okay, you've answered 5, let's let somebody else. Then that to be effective.
Yeah, so any other hints here?
So something that Mike Starbird was talking about yesterday morning was that he puts people into groups at the start of class, maybe like groups of 3, and then each group has to be responsible for presenting something at the board. So if you have one kid who's really eager to present, he has to work within his group, and then, you know, let's say you have 8 different groups, there's no way he can present more than one every 8 problems or something like that, and has to work with his other group members to do that.
I just want to interject, Sage on the stage, that I try to also mimic the IBL experience for those students. So I would push them to ask questions more. So if I can spot the student that is doing very well, I would then tell them, okay, let's try to ask some questions to your group mates, or let's try to ask some questions to the whole group to try to push them to also, I think that would be the next level of, there's answering and then there's making questions to try to direct answers. And so I try to help with that. I don't know. My last question that I noticed across all the fields here, is about constraints. There are some individuals in here, actually, technically, almost every class that we teach has some sort of a constraint in terms of content, right? But then there's also constraints in terms of teaching a course with multiple courses, there's a course coordinator and so forth. And as a new user, how can you try to incorporate IBL strategies or IBL methods while being in that kind of walled-in garden? Any conjectures? Notice I say conjectures. none of this is proven, right? There's not a 100% proof to all this. So,
I'll be using the doc camera.
And
okay. So I told her that whenever you're ready.
She shows yeah.
Exactly. It's going to take a couple of seconds for it to shuffle through, but it will.
Thanks, Chris. This isn't really totally IBL, but I taught a discussion section, so I only got to see my students once a week. But when I saw them, that's when I was supposed to answer their questions, have them turn in their homework, and have them take their quizzes. And so they started getting really stressed out because they would not come see me in my office hours. And so they weren't getting their questions answered early enough to like succeed in their homework and their quizzes. And so about halfway through the semester, I started recording videos and giving them access to the videos on like Sunday or Monday, and our discussion was on Thursday. So, I mean, like I said, it's not completely IBL, but it was more of, you know, I'll work some of your examples that I know I'm going to have to work earlier in the week, and then we can use more of our discussion time to talk a little bit more in depth about what's going on with the calculus. So.
Time is a gigantic constraint. Talk about a limitation there. And especially when you're in an IBL course and someone goes off on a tangent, that's wonderful, right? And you want to keep going with the tangent, but you've got to do more on tangents. Thank you. I'll be here until Saturday. Yes. This constraint problem is always difficult, especially with new users, especially with young new users, right? And one of the things I always did within my walled garden that I taught in, I taught a Calculus 1 with 43 sections. And we were all supposed to be in our, yes, where I was at was a large institution. And we were supposed to have common final and so forth and so on. And so what I usually did was some type of IBL activity inside the classroom, and then I asked some questions that I knew were typical follow the book or mimic the book type questions, and then some questions that were very more exploratory. One example is I asked them if they ever saw in life a perfect circle, and that sparked a lot of discussion in the class, which I had to cut after 10 minutes because I had to cover Newton's law. Anyways, with that, I hope you all have had a little bit of your questions answered, but I hope you all have met each other well enough to exchange emails and to exchange emails further when you're trying out some of these IBL activities. And I thank you all for your patience. I was told of this gig 5 minutes beforehand, so I made it up on the fly. Yeah. I will take that. All right, thank you all so very much. Thank you.